So let's talk about some rings. There's been quite a bit of buzz about Cathedral's new transparent ring, or a completely clear ring. Zach McAllister posted some teaser pictures recently. I sent him a set of rings to play with. He really enjoyed them. There's been a lot of buzz about it, a lot of questions. People are curious about it, which is cool. So we're here to talk about that a little bit. So one of the big things that I need to clarify, this is a transparent ring. This is a translucent ring. The transparent ring is completely clear. The translucent ring is not clear but doesn't allow light to pass through it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Part of my reason for doing this was just curiosity. I wanted to make a new ring, something to play with. The art aspect of juggling and circus performing is quite intriguing to me and something I enjoy dealing with a lot. I didn't know until after I started this project that other people have approached the clear ring before. Other people have approached a mirror ring as well, which is also on my list of projects to work on. But since the Cathedral Halo rings hit the market, people tend to really seem to like my rings and how I approach craftsmanship. I think that as juggling grows, so should our equipment. A juggler that doesn't practice won't get better, just like a props manufacturer that doesn't try to improve their product, it will never improve. So let's start by talking about why this ring is the way it is. So this is not made out of the same material as a traditional ring. Traditional rings are made out of some sort of polypropylene composite. It just depends on what manufacturer you're using. As for this, I went with something that is significantly softer, but it feels more rigid. That's kind of a weird thing. It feels a little like plexiglass, but it's definitely not acrylic. It's not going to break if you bend, if you do whatever. You throw it up in the air, it'll come down, it won't break. I've yet to have one of these break just from throwing it. I've thrown this as high as I can throw, so we're talking 55 plus feet, smack down right in the middle of concrete on the driveway. It takes huge chunks out of the ring, doesn't break. Granted, if you throw it at the ground as hard as you can, it will break. I've had a few shatter that way. It's kind of a strange thing about making new products, is testing its durability and really exploring. First and foremost, I want everybody that is interested in this ring to understand that this is not your daily juggling ring, for several reasons. One, the more you juggle this ring, the more scratches it's going to get. Every piece of juggling equipment any of us have ever owned will get scratched and marred up in some capacity at some point. The other thing about it is the way they have to be stored. You have to store them with some sort of soft fabric between them, or they will actually scratch each other because little dust particles will get in between, and as they move around it'll start to scratch it. The original set that I sent to Zach, I just threw some scrap fabric in a box, not thinking that it was upholstery fabric with like heavy nylon, and it kind of scratched up the rings just ever so slightly. You can see it in some of his higher resolution pictures. But the other thing about it that makes it definitely not your daily driver ring is the edge. I could have produced this with a nice round smooth edge radius like the normal Cathedral Halo rings, but it takes away a lot from the illusion of the ring. So if you look at the side of a ring, if it's flat, you've got a more consistent plane, but if you curve it, and then it kind of cuts it off, and then you have a much more visible bead going along the top of the ring, which is something I wanted to avoid. The first few that I made had a nice round radius and felt really good, but the illusion kind of left really quickly, and that being said, I do all sorts of custom projects for people, so if somebody really wants that perfect edge, we can do it. You'll just lose a lot of your effect. With these being pretty square, so they're not like square and sharp, but you'll definitely feel them on every throw and catch. Around that edge sits at more of like a 90 degree. Not too dissimilar from, I believe, Play's ring. They have a flat edge ring. It's a little strange. This is definitely a bit sharper than that. So some other people have asked about, like, well, what happens if it breaks, this and that. With all my products, I kind of stand behind them. I've had a handful of my normal Cathedral Halo rings break, and of course, I stand behind that. So this ring was one of the first few that I made. There's a few different edge spots on it that I was experimenting with a round radius, experimenting with a semi-radius, experimenting with something just more rough. This ring here is actually the first one that I made. I cut it by hand. I shouldn't have. We recently have made a new tool bench just for cutting these rings. So we're going to go ahead and slowly start to do this guy right here. So here we are creasing now. So a lot of people have worried about the shatteredness of it. It is just not a thing. Fortunately, this ring and this type of plastic has some really awesome thermal properties. As you bend and break things. A lot of people have, done a little bit of metalworking, nails, screws, and if something bends, you kind of bend it back and forth. It gets really, really hot, makes it more malleable, and the hotter it gets, the more you can work with it, and then you bend to break it off. But, so there we have it bent back, but again, it's just right back to normal. There are a few other ways to fix these with heat. Most people have had rings warp permanently with things like leaving it in the car, in the prop box with, something laying on the ring so they're nice and bent. There's lots of ways to fix rings. People have been asking me to do a video on that for a while, and I'm not entirely sure why I have not done that yet. Most rings on the market have a polished finishes where mine do not, as where you'll never get the same reflection glare from my standard rings, which allows to have all the light just passes straight through it. Doesn't really soak a lot of it up. You can see a little bit in the edge where some of the cutting and sanding has taken place, where it's not polished, where it does soak up in that ring edge. And again, that's why we've not made a perfect round radius, is because it'll absorb a lot more light and lose that effect. A translucent ring, the light can pass through it, is not perfectly clear. So these rings, before you decide whether you want to order them or not, understand a couple things. One, they are really hard to see, especially from the side. Just doing a little bit of this, the ring just kind of fades out, and a lot of it depends on your background noise. If I were to be juggling these with something like tree in the background, they camouflage real bad and they're hard to see. Though if you look at them straight on, that is definitely a lot less transparent just because of the way the cutting and the finishing works. There's lots of other things that I want to experiment with these, but again, this is a really new product, a really new project. The only good functional set of this is with Zach McAllister, so if you have any extra questions, feel free to blow up his email. But the rings stack up really well together. Doesn't really seem to matter how many rings you get together, especially if they're fresh and clean. If you go to clean the rings, make sure to use something that's non-scratching, cotton-based microfiber. What you clean these with, it's real important. Try to use something that's not an abrasive solvent. Try to avoid things like alcohols. Scratching's going to happen. It's just part of it. Again, most rings you can't see the scratches in because of how they are. If you treat them right, they definitely scratch a lot less, but they're as transparent as the next ring. If you are to stack up several of these, as long as they are clear, you can see straight through it, no issues. Even having 6 or 7 of them stacked up, I had 10 sheets of this material stacked up together, fresh before I'd cut any of it. They just looked great. I'm really excited to try to explore a few more projects with these. Not entirely sure what else to say right now. Again, it's a super new project. Part of how I started the Cathedral project and all of my my company and products is I have a desire to try something. I have an idea that pops in my head, and rather than spending copious amounts of time trying to say, will this work or will this not work, playing a lot of the what ifs games, I just kind of go for it, which makes it really exciting. And I think that's part of the art for me, isn't just the performing, isn't just the big tricks, isn't just the show, but is the craft and the creation of product. Because I don't look at everything that I make as a product. I look at it as a piece of art, an idea in art, or a tool to create more art.